Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me better because I don't think my mic was on and it sounded so echoey in here. Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new Sims 4 video. As you can probably tell, I'm not filming this in my bedroom today. I'm in a different location. I thought I'd spice it up a bit. Anyway, as you can probably tell with me sat here, doing more of the commentary video, we're back again. Finally found a topic I want to discuss. Actually, I've been wanting to discuss this topic for a good while now, so let's just get into it. Okay, so as you can probably tell by the title, you already know today's topic, but is The Sims 4 sexist? Now, I know what you're thinking already, okay? You're thinking, Emma, that's a stretch. What are you on about, okay? It's a stretch. Why are you thinking that? That's bold accusation. Okay, but there are a few things that I feel like could slightly give the impression of The Sims 4 / EA being a little bit sexist. I firstly want to just say, because I know that the title seems a little dramatic, to say the least. I know it's a little bit attention grabbing, so obviously I've done that for a reason, and if you've clicked on the video, clearly you're interested in this discussion, so it must have worked. But anyway, let's just get into it, shall we? Okay, so where has this bold accusation come from? Where has this all stemmed from? For me, it's Create a Sim. Now, I think The Sims 4 does in general pride itself on being very, very inclusive, and I actually think The Sims, to give it all its credit for all the, mistakes that are there, The Sims is an incredibly inclusive game that I feel like does a pretty good job of trying to include everybody, whoever you are and whoever you want to be. And I love that about the game, and it's definitely one of the great things. However, I do feel that unfortunately men as an actual subgroup within the game have been slightly forgotten if we compare it to women. In terms of the hair and in terms of, I think clothing is the big issue, but even with hairs, there has been an introduction of more longer hairs within the game, which is fine because I definitely think the longer hair mullet style was a trend at a certain point. But I would argue there is kind of a lack of short hair for men. There never seems to be loads. There's always a couple that get introduced with every pack. Now, although hairstyles is a little bit of an issue for me personally, I do think the big thing with the male category in Create a Sim is mainly actually down to clothing. And I think particularly in the last couple of packs and even updates, there has been a lot more introduction of female clothing in the male category. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, it's just EA being inclusive, but I do feel like because of them doing that, it's almost like they've ignored the male actual category itself. It's like they've kind of forgotten it. And I kind of think it gives EA basically an excuse in a way, because they've obviously allowed men to have female clothing. I think it's almost allowed EA to get away with not actually giving men as much content because of it, which I don't think is fair, because as much as, yes, it's great, it allows you to put female clothing on male clothing, and I think that's great. There is obviously ways of doing it without necessarily that being within the category, because you can just totally get rid of the masculine or feminine thing in Create a Sim, so you could technically do it anyway. But I do think it's lovely of them to have the feature in, but I don't think that should be an excuse for EA to not put in as much content for men just because they're doing that. And there is also nothing wrong with just being a normal man as well. There's nothing wrong with that, but why don't we get more content that allows that? And I'm not talking about loads of things. Now, I do understand, I actually think this is a wider issue anyway. If you compare female clothing to male clothing is so lackluster, and it's gotten better in the last 5 years, I think, personally, but I think there's still a lot to do. Male clothing in general is just so lackluster, and I actually think that does reflect in game as well, which is kind of poor, and I do feel bad a little bit. Not loads, but a little bit. Like I said, I think for me, I think it's just another way of EA to just be lazy and kind of branch it into this brand of them being inclusive, which I don't think is fair, because I think they're ignoring men. I think they are ignoring male clothing and male hairstyles in the game. I also did put a little bit about gameplay. I do feel like a lot of gameplay is more directed by women and maybe female interests, which we're going to get into in its own separate category. Yeah, I do think the lack of creator sim and hairstyles and just everything, I feel like the game is very pro the female ratio to the males. I think it is slightly disappointing. Like I said, given how, inclusive the game is, should be inclusive of everybody. But I'd be interested to know whether people think the same as I do. Do you guys think that there is a good ratio? I personally don't. I really struggle to make male sims within the game. And I do think a big part of it is because we just don't have as much content compared to females. There is so much more for women to style and give different styles to, whereas men, you really struggle. And like I said, I don't know whether that's just them reflecting on a wider culture of men's clothing being pretty lackluster in real life, and whether the game is just reflecting that. But I definitely think they could be more innovative and creative and add more options in for men than they currently do. I do feel like they get widely ignored in a lot of packs as well. Anyway, let's get into some other wider discussion points now that we've reflected on my personal issues of why I've kind of wanted to make this video. Let's go. Firstly, let's talk about demographics, okay? Because in 2021, apparently, it was found that 60% of the player demographic of The Sims 4 was female. Now, initially, I didn't know whether I thought that number was quite a lot or whether it was low. I don't know. I think The Sims as a whole has always been marketed towards females compared to males. So maybe I thought that demographic was actually lower than what I thought it was going to be. So I did argue within my notes, is EA catering more towards females, knowing that that is more of their demographic? Possibly. They could be. I mean, 60% is still the majority of players that are female. Possibly, it could be that they are just catering more towards women. But I do think that, to play devil's advocate, if there is 40% of players that are male, assuming they're male, that is also a large demographic. We're not just talking it's only 20% of people, it's 40%. That's quite a lot of people that I'm assuming are male. So for me, that is a large part of the demographic that they are ignoring. And I would argue, like I said, I struggle to make a male sim within the game. And I don't know whether that is just because I'm female and I do find it harder, or whether it's actually just because the options are just not as good for men, that the vision is harder to replicate in the game versus real life. I don't know. I just find it really fascinating. And I guess this topic could open up an absolute can of worms of getting into the whole gender ideas and debate. And I'm going to reflect on it a little bit, but I don't want to get massively into it because I think you could do a whole video dedicated to it itself. Yeah, I basically argued within this section that 40% is a large statistic of people that are getting underrepresented within the game, and that's okay. I mean, there is probably a figure of people that do like the content and do like, the inclusivity of female clothing, but there probably is also a large proportion of the men that are playing the game that are just what you might consider to be a traditional man and dress like a traditional man. Where are the options for just creating that sort of person? Has EA, in their efforts of trying to be more inclusive, actually forgotten about a wide proportion of demographics? Who knows? I do wonder, because like I said, and obviously we're talking that these statistics go back 4 years, so proportions may have changed ever so slightly, and we'll get into that in a sec, but I do think if those demographics are still relatively the same, then that number is a lot lower than what I thought, specifically because whenever I thought about traditional media, right, you would have, particularly with EA, I think The Sims the Sims franchise as a whole, I think it was created to be more marketed at women versus men, right? Men had your FIFA. I don't actually remember what other games at EA. There's another one, there's a shooting one for sure, but I can't remember, and I don't think it's Call of Duty, but it's something else. But either way, I think The Sims was created to kind of maybe have a game that could be more marketed towards women, and I did therefore expect the numbers to be slightly higher than what they are. But I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's good that the game is actually appealing to as many men than it is women. Obviously, it's not a split, it's not a 50-50, but it's pretty close. I think that's interesting. Obviously, I don't 100% know where they or how the statistics were compiled, so I don't know how accurate it is, but if those numbers are true, I do think that's really interesting. Let's get into a wider discussion on this topic now that we've kind of discussed the demographics a little bit. Let's talk about something that has been plaguing my mind for the last few months, and that is the rise of the cozy game genre. Now, this has been kind of ongoing, I guess, the last couple of years. Well, I would say it's been going on for a while, but has probably gotten worse or seen an increase in the last couple of years. Now, I first want to say, I mainly play what you would consider cozy games, right? I love Sims, I love Animal Crossing, I love Stardew Valley. The only one that I play that probably does go against it a bit is like, I do actually like FC 25 or whatever, FIFA FC 25, whatever. I do like it, but that's just because I'm into football. So, but for the most part, I do love cozy games, so I'm not attacking the cozy game genre, but obviously the rise of everything cozy, and I'm not just talking about games, like the whole cozy genre has been a thing, particularly over the last 6 months, and it's mainly been a target for women versus men. Don't ask me why, but it has. And I guess this kind of goes hand in hand with the whole rise of like the grandma era, this whole era of like sitting in at home with your drink, snacks, and playing a video game, or knitting, or crocheting, or all of these sorts of things that have become the kind of trend in the last few months. Now, you're probably thinking, why is this relevant, Emma? But with the rise of everything all cozy and people specifically looking for this sort of genre of things, it means that companies have been more interested in bringing out games that could be targeted and more marketed towards women and that genre. And I think for a very long time, it was traditionally thought that video games are masculine, right? They're more male, they're not as female. And even when you think about those that are probably quite embedded in the gaming community, I think there is still that stereotype that exists towards a lot of men that kind of think that, you know, all women do is play cozy games and like they're not proper gamers. Like that was like the stereotype, right, for quite a while. And I think it still exists, unfortunately. But instead of companies seeing this as a bad thing, they've used it as a profitable thing and they've invested more into it, which is kind of why I think you have seen the increase in like your Sims, Stardew Valley, and even with like, you could probably argue with things like Enzoy coming about as well. Like all of these games have been made to be more marketed at women, and I do think it's interesting. I'm sure there's many articles about The Sims 4 and like it being more marketed towards women and stuff. If it's not out there, I'm very surprised. I'm sure there's got to be a marketing student somewhere that's done it. But I do think the whole topic of it is really interesting. Now, I do think it's a good thing that companies are obviously interested at bringing more women into gaming and are seeing women as a market for video gaming. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a step in the right direction. But I do wonder whether, and I don't know with this one, and this might just be me really actually just going out a bit on a whim here. I do wonder whether it's slightly darker. It has a darker meaning to it. And I don't know whether, like I said, this is a stretch or whether people might think the same. I do wonder with how expensive The Sims 4 is, whether they think that women will be more likely to spend that sort of money on a game versus men. And I don't know whether it's this, like I said, this weird, darker, exploitative, manipulative thing. And I don't know whether I'm just thinking too much into it because I like to overthink about everything. So it very well could be. And it would be so interesting to actually look into. But with companies obviously targeting women more with games now, I do wonder whether the Sims team think they can get away with it a lot more because it's women, because it's mainly women playing their game. Is that a stretch? Maybe. But is there a correlation between it? Maybe. it would be, like I said, it would be so interesting to actually compare it and have a look, because for me personally, obviously The Sims is a really expensive game. We're talking now like over £1,000. Like, God forbid if you have the kits and stuff, like maybe even £1,500 just for The Sims. And with this whole idea lately of there being like girl maths and all that sort of thing, I do wonder whether companies like EA have used that as a tool to manipulate women into spending more money. And I'm saying specifically women, but like maybe men too. I don't know, because I guess if we talk about traditional gender stereotypes, women are more traditional for spending money on things like clothes and makeup and stuff. And now with people not wanting to go out as much, instead we're now spending that money, investing that money into a game like The Sims for, I don't know. Sometimes I think in these videos, why am I so deep? Why have I gone on a right tangent? I do wonder ever so slightly, when you really look at it, is The Sims 4 sexist, but in both ways, okay? The funny thing is, I obviously started this video explaining why I was so upset, you know, lack of male, like actual traditional male clothing and all the rest of it. And, you know, there is a lack of that, and I do still believe that. But like I said, I do wonder whether it is a deeper thing and whether it goes far deeper than like that surface level of just like, there's not as many male clothing in the game, which there isn't. And I still think that there should be. And I think they should focus on that in the next few packs and updates, actually, because even up like the free updates are more like female centric than they are male. I would like to see that. But like I said, I do wonder with the whole rise of the cozy genre and the whole point of like The Sims 4 being marketed more towards females than it is males, with like, you can just tell even with like visuals and stuff like that, it's very aesthetic, it's very appealing, it's probably seen as more dainty and girly than it is masculine. So I do think it's interesting. I don't know, like, this is the thing, I don't know, but I'm gonna be honest, like, obviously companies like EA are just all about trying to get money, and I do think The Sims was made as a way of trying to include the female demographic into gaming in a space where like females were largely ignored, and I do think it's very clever of them. And I do wonder whether The Sims being a more female game and also being incredibly expensive. Let's be honest, like, The Sims 4 has probably the most DLC out of any game ever, and it's more directed at females. And is that a coincidence, or is that manipulation? I don't know. I just think it's such an interesting topic, and I would be, like I said, very interested to know both perspectives of, do you think there's lack of male clothing? Do you think that needs to be improved? And equally, do you think that the reason we don't have that many male clothing is because of this whole player demographic thing, and equally the way that EA are trying to market The Sims? Who knows? I just think this is a really interesting debate, and I guess this is more of a deeper discussion than some of my other commentary videos that I've spoken about. I mean, I maybe touched on it in my last one with the ageism thing, but like, this one is a little deeper and I think requires a lot more thought to it. So I would be interested to see whether people do hold the same opinion, because this one I'm not 100% sure about. It's just a lot of theories. It does make sense in my head anyway for it to be part of this whole wider discussion in gender stereotypes, really. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I'd be interested to know people's opinions. Yeah, I think it's a really complex topic, and I don't think it's as simple as being a yes or no answer, but I would be interested to know people's thoughts and opinions, because this is one that I think I'm still trying to decide and work out. Anyway, if you have enjoyed, then please be sure to leave a like. Go and subscribe if you haven't already. I do lots of these videos alongside my more traditional Sims content. Did I already say like and subscribe? I think I did. Okay, cool. Go to the comment. Like I said, this one is very interesting and does require a lot of thought about, and I do wonder whether people will share the same opinions or not. I think this is one that could be a little more divisive, I guess, because I don't think it's a clean cut yes or no answer, if I'm being brutally honest. Okay, I have rambled on for too long. Like I said, as always, if there's any more discussion points that you guys have noticed when you're playing the game, or anything that you have picked out that you would like me to talk about, then please let me know. And I hope you guys have enjoyed. Thank you for spending some time with me today on this lovely Monday when I'm filming this. I don't know when this is going out. Definitely not Monday. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and I will see you all next time for another video. Okay, bye everyone.